Today we are taking a look at three different artists who painted the West at different times, but all three did a lot of painting at the Grand Canyon. So we'll take a look at their work and see how they saw and painted the canyon. Today we're taking a look at the Grand Canyon and three different artists who painted it: Thomas Moran, Gunnar Widforce, and Wilson Hurley. And the Grand Canyon is a very awe-inspiring place to paint. It's a hard place to paint. There's so much going on, so much to see and render. But if inspiration helps you paint better, then it's a great place to paint. I've been there a lot of times, and each time I go, it really takes my breath away. So we'll start here first with Thomas Moran. And he first went to the Grand Canyon in 1873. He was born in 1837 and died in 1926. But he went with John Wesley Powell, his second expedition there to the Grand Canyon. And he recorded it with watercolors and drawings, and then came back and did large paintings of the Grand Canyon back in his studios in New York. And his paintings are large for the most part and very dramatic. He wasn't after total reality. He wanted to show the drama that you could see at the places that he painted. And so a lot of light, a lot of drama, and very well done. Now the key, I think, to painting the Grand Canyon, if you could break it down to three keys, it would be: the first is to simplify, because there's so much to take in. All the little dark and light shadow patterns in the background. Same thing in the foreground. And you're trying to show light and atmosphere. That could be the goal of painting at the Grand Canyon, as opposed to painting the detail. So to simplify first, I think, is the most important thing. Eliminate what's not important. You can always add detail at the end, decide which area is going to get more detail, but for as long as you can, keep it simple. Big, simple shapes, big, simple values, and get the right relationship between those shapes and values before you go to detail. And Moran did use a lot of detail, especially in the foreground here, but then less and less detail as the painting recedes and goes back. Also, the value relationships, how dark the darks are in the foreground and how light the darks are in the background. That gives you the atmosphere that you see at the Grand Canyon, as well as the temperature contrast. Warmer darks and lights in the foreground, cooler darks and lights in the background. But he has a lot of different views, mostly from the south rim. Again, suggesting the light, simplifying. This may be just a detail because it doesn't look like a typical Thomas Moran painting with all the added dramatic things that he puts in his paintings, like this. Very dramatic, but full of contrast and bigger, simpler shapes for the most part, and then a few areas where he's adding the detail. But that value and temperature change between the foreground and the background gives you the depth and atmosphere that's so evident at the Grand Canyon. Same thing here, showing the drama of the clouds coming over the canyon and the sunlight breaking through. A lot of drama. Now the next painter is Gunnar Widforce. And he was a watercolorist, born in 1879 and died in 1935. And he first came to the canyon in the 1920s and did a lot of painting there. He spent 10 years there, selling his work right there at the canyon to individuals, as well as trading his work for lodging and food at the Bright Angel Lodge there at the South Rim. And he was a watercolorist, and most of his paintings were done on the spot, which is amazing because he also saw a lot of detail. You can see here all the rendering. Now, whether he did all that rendering on the spot or not, I don't know. He certainly got the big masses and the big suggestion of light first, then towards the end adding the detail. So he did a lot with detail, adding a lot of detail, but he still got the atmosphere and the sense of light that's so evident at the Grand Canyon. And that's hard to do, those two things together, adding a lot of detail and capturing the atmosphere. Usually you're successful at one or the other, but not both. And he did both really well. Keeping the background very simple and really adding a lot of detail in the foreground, but still capturing the light and the atmosphere that's there. Here's a tree study at the canyon. Looks basically like a raw sienna and violet watercolor. Simple color, but full range of values, suggesting the light. And again, the atmosphere by getting the darkest darks in the foreground on the tree and on the ground around the tree, and then the background shadow is a lot lighter to create that depth. And without that, it's just not going to work. You could have great brush technique, wonderful color, but if you can't suggest the atmosphere and sense of light, then it's just not going to work at all. That's much more important than the detail. Again, a lot of detail here at Moran Point, there at the south rim. Nice pattern of dark in the background. Everything in the background is cool, or at least blues and violets. It's a warm violet in the sunlight in the background, but a very cool bluish violet in the shadows. And that contrasts with the warmer shadows up front. Again, because you're closer, you can see into the shadows more and you see more reflected light. And that's going to warm them up compared to the background. But he also was able to compose really well. All his compositions work nicely. Because without a good composition, the values and colors don't really matter. Again, you see a lot of detail here in the shadow. Very simplified in the background. And those values gradually getting lighter in the shadow anyway as they recede. And that's going to show the depth. It's a nice one here in full sunlight, not as many shadows. The shadows are smaller and the sunlight's a lot bigger, which is tricky because then things become more subtle. You got the subtle value on this sloping area on this cliff, and then a lighter value in this upright shape. So a lot of subtle value changes within the light. Not so much in the darks. Darks you can keep more simple, although he didn't. We can see here he got a lot more detail in the shadows here. But still, even with rendering all this detail, it works really well. It doesn't fall apart, which is what usually happens when you add so much detail to your painting. The big shapes of dark and light fall apart and it doesn't read at all. You lose your depth and sense of light, and there's just no three dimensions to your landscape. So he was able to add a lot of detail, but still keep things simple enough that the composition of the painting still reads well. So another one here, this really dark, warmer shadow comes forward and the lighter, cooler shadows stay in the distance. But even the sunlit area of the cliffs is cool. It's a bluish violet, but you have to warm it up. And he warmed it up with a little bit of yellow-orange. Still blue or blue-violet, but it's a warmer blue-violet, so it looks sunlit. Now we'll go to Wilson Hurley, and he was born in 1924, died in 2008. And he attended West Point in the 40s, was in the Air Force for a while, earned a law degree from George Washington University, then practiced law for 14 years, all before he started painting. Started painting when he was 41. Had a small stint in Vietnam first. So did a lot even before he started painting. But like Thomas Moran, his paintings of the Grand Canyon, all his paintings of the West have a grandeur to them. Very, very dramatic, suggesting the light and atmosphere of the Southwest. Also showing a lot of detail, but not overly so. Not so much detail that the painting falls apart. Could really suggest the atmosphere. I mean, it's a lot easier, I think, to suggest light and shadow when you have this strong sunlight hitting everything with the bigger, stronger shadows. But when things get more subtle, it takes more observation and the ability to simplify first what you see. There's still light and shadow here, but it's very subtle. So establishing in bigger, simpler terms the light and shadow, then going in and creating the subtlety is what's hard to do. And a lot of times we want to get the subtlety first when we paint, and that just doesn't work. You have to get the extremes down in the big shapes first, then go back in and create the subtlety. And he was able to do that really well. This is a smaller 12 by 8 painting, probably done on the spot. You can see that a lot of value changes within the shadow and the sunlight, trying to record what's going on there light-wise. It's another really nice dramatic view, I think on the south rim. But very strong light, a lot of subtlety within the shadows. He did a lot of large scale paintings, especially at the Isle of York Museum. He has a nice triptych of the Grand Canyon. I think I have a picture of that. And also at the National Western Heritage Museum, he's got large murals of the West, including one of the Grand Canyon. You can see the scale here with the figures. Very nice. Worth looking at to study his work. It's another one here. Different views of the canyon, in that he's got views of down below at the river, kind of along trails, up above looking down at the canyon. Had a lot of different views, but was always able to suggest the light and the atmosphere. There's one in the winter, again, very atmospheric, very luminous. The light hitting the snow-covered tree here, and the real subtle, close values of everything else. Really amazing painting. Hard to do that. One more dramatic down on the river in showing the light, what the light is doing to things, and still being able to get color value changes within the shadow. You don't want your shadows to go opaque or flat, so there has to be some reflected light in there without seeing too much, keeping the shadows more simple. And then this one too, the rainfall hitting the cliffs in the background. Really nice dramatic light. Now, a few of my paintings, I don't have a lot of paintings from the Grand Canyon, so I have a few smaller ones here. This is a 9 by 12 of a rainstorm coming in the late afternoon at the Grand Canyon. And again, that idea of my darkest darks up here contrasting the lighter darks in the background. If I don't have that value relationship right, I'm not going to get that atmosphere, the depth in the painting. Same thing with the temperature. All the colors, even in the light in the background, are going to be a bit on the cooler side, and all the colors, including the shadows in the foreground, are going to be a bit on the warmer side. So my red violets and violet sunlit rocks are going to be somewhat warm, but they're still going to be a violet, red violet, blue violet. So having that contrast, really important. And then showing the value changes and the soft edges in the clouds to show that the sunlight's really important. It's another small one, maybe 11 by 14. I don't really remember. But again, that value change, darker, warmer shadows in the foreground, really pushing the lighter shadows in the background. That comparison is what's going to give me the atmosphere and the depth. And then having the reflected light bouncing into the shadow here in the foreground, which I don't have in the background. Too much of that in the background and you lose the atmosphere and the depth. So keeping the background simple and blocking this in, kind of a warmer violet. And then while it's still wet, adding the slightly lighter reflected light that hits these rocks, turns them a bit more yellow-orange within the cooler, bluer or blue-violet shadow. Because without reflected light in the shadows in the foreground, the shadows go kind of flat. You can see the reflected light here. Again, I block it in with that pretty cool, slightly darker violet, and then mix up a little bit lighter, muted orange and scrub into it to show that reflected light. And that goes a long way to make things look more refined, more finished, without adding a bunch of detail. Here's another one on the south rim. In fact, that's the only place I've painted. I haven't been to the north rim for all the years. Lived in Arizona and just went to the south rim. Here, really simplifying the background to just blue, violet, and orange. And then same colors in the foreground, blue, violet, and orange, and yellow-orange. A lot more intense in the foreground, a lot darker darks, warmer lights, and shadows a bit warmer than the background. especially in here where I have the reflected light that's making the shadow more of a dark orange rather than a dark violet. There's still dark violet in the shadow, and I started with that dark violet, but I came back with the local color of the orange bouncing into that shadow from down here. And usually that reflected light is going to be a color from that object that's throwing the light in there. So these orange rocks are reflecting orange into the violet shadow. Trying to simplify this shrubbery and move your eye along to follow that shape or pattern of green that kind of moves you into the painting a bit more. But I think the key here was to keep the background more simple, pretty much just two values and no detail, and the darks a lot lighter than the darks in the foreground. It's a smaller, just tree study. Again, if I don't get these darks in these trees, these dark blue-greens or greens, dark enough, they won't contrast with the shadows in the background and create that atmosphere. Kind of designing these rocks as a pattern to kind of lead the eye to the tree, and then the tree can wind around in the background. Your eye picks up lines and shapes and patterns, and you want to use those to lead the viewer throughout the painting. So these rocks weren't necessarily set up that way, but I thought it made a better painting to do that. And that's ultimately the goal, is to use what I'm seeing to make a good painting, not just to copy it. Here's one at Moran Point, in a small one, just trying to show where the light's coming from. It's early in the morning, so the light's coming from the right, and it's kind of low. So I have a lighter value here on the side, and then a little bit darker halftone on top. It's not going to get the same value. Otherwise, it's not going to look three-dimensional. If I do the same value here on the side as I do on the top, and then, of course, the shadow is a different value as well. But a lot of reflected light in these shadows in the foreground, none in the background because it's just too far away. It's not to say you could not put reflected light in the background, but it does kill the atmosphere a little bit more. I could see reflected light in there, but chose to keep it more simple so that it reads better. If you have a chance to get to the Grand Canyon, do it. Suggestions on painting when you're there: I would suggest working small at first, because there's so much to take in. 6x8, 8x10. So you're just seeing big, simple shapes, and learn how to get those right value relationships. Much easier with a smaller surface than a bigger one. Then later doing a bigger one, 16x20, 20x24. And once you learn to simplify out there, it's easier to go a little bigger.